April 19, 1775. Lexington Green. The sun had barely risen, and 70 disciplined British soldiers stood in neat lines, bayonets glinting. Across the field, a handful of colonial farmers peered nervously over the barrels of their cannons. To the British, these were laughable toys, rusty, misaligned, and manned by untrained men. No one, not the redcoats, not the colonists themselves, could have predicted what happened next. In less than a minute, the battlefield would erupt in chaos, forever changing the course of a revolution. The American Revolution wasn't won solely by muskets or courage. It was won by ingenuity, improvisation, and a willingness to turn simple technology into a decisive weapon. Cannons, primitive, clunky, and often overlooked, would become instruments of terror against Britain's professional line infantry. These weren't factory-made marvels. Many were forged in small colonial foundries, transported on wagons over muddy roads, and crewed by men who had spent their lives plowing fields, not mastering artillery drills. Yet, against all odds, their first volleys proved devastating. Meet Sergeant Thomas Green, a farmer from Concord. At 28, he had never faced a trained army. His cannon was nicknamed Old Betsy by the locals, its iron barrel pitted, its carriage barely held together. But Thomas knew its strength, raw firepower at close range. Across the field, Captain Jonathan Hewitt of the British 10th Regiment laughed. "Just a pile of farmers with kitchenware," he muttered, watching the colonists fumble with their equipment. Yet what Thomas and his crew lacked in polish, they made up for in precision and desperation. By 8 a.m., the redcoats had formed their battle lines, marching with military precision. The colonists, scattered along ridges and behind fences, loaded their cannons with hastily prepared ammunition, grapeshot, scrap iron, even old musket balls. No officer had trained them in formal artillery maneuvers. Every calculation, angle, distance, wind, was guessed. Every mistake could mean disaster. Yet, there was an unspoken confidence among the colonists: if we cannot beat them, we can at least make them pay. At 8:30, Old Betsy roared. The first volley tore through the perfectly aligned lines of the British infantry. Muskets were dropped, officers fell, and the disciplined formation dissolved into confusion. A single cannonball smashed through a platoon, sending men tumbling into the mud. Others were struck by grapeshot, leaving the soldiers stunned and unprepared. The colonists, shocked by their own success, reloaded quickly, firing again and again. Thomas Green remembered, "I thought we'd be dead in the first minute. Instead, we were the ones standing, while they scattered like leaves in a storm." The colonists' cannons were simple, yet brutally effective. Each barrel fired a dozen pieces of iron at once, creating a wall of destruction 20 feet wide. At ranges under 100 yards, the musket-armed infantry stood no chance. British officers attempted to regroup, but every advance was met with another volley. For them, the battlefield had become unpredictable. What they had dismissed as crude artillery now dictated the rhythm of combat. Even the most experienced redcoat couldn't anticipate the chaos. The precision, born from desperation rather than training, turned routine cannon fire into a weapon of psychological terror. By mid-morning, the British lines were in full retreat. Small bands of colonists moved to cut off flanking attempts, their cannons tearing apart supply wagons and officers' ranks alike. This battle, though modest in size, revealed a crucial lesson: industrial-scale discipline wasn't enough. Ingenuity, adaptability, and the courage to innovate could turn even the humblest tools into instruments of power. What the redcoats initially laughed at became the reason their orderly advance crumbled. A handful of farmers, armed with primitive cannons, had rewritten the rules of engagement in that field. The skirmish at Lexington and Concord became legend. More importantly, it set the stage for a revolution defined not by brute force alone, but by ingenuity and adaptation. Cannons, wagons, and homemade shot became symbols of a people unwilling to accept tyranny. Across Massachusetts, towns began preparing their own artillery, learning from every engagement. By the time of Bunker Hill, these same colonial cannons had proven they could stop the best-trained European troops in their tracks. The laughter of the redcoats at farmer artillery became a distant memory. By the end of the war, colonists had mastered the technology, turning simple machines into decisive weapons. Old Betsy and her sisters were more than iron and gunpowder. They were hope, resistance, and proof that innovation and courage could topple even the mightiest army. The British had laughed. The colonists had endured. And in that brief, violent symphony of fire and lead, a nation was born.